Yeah, it used to not be hidden like that. They went and hid it on me. All righty. Well, welcome everyone. It's really nice to have such a good group for our topic today on funeral planning 101. We thought this was an especially appropriate topic for the Funeral Consumer Society of Colorado to circle around to after all the other wonderful topics that we've been running in webinars for the last year and a half or so. And so I'm going to be presenting today, Sue Mackey. I think most of you know who I am. And then, so I'm the president of the board of Funeral Consumer Society. And Jill is going to be co-presenting with me, Jill Ross. And Jill, if you want to wave your hand there, she's vice president on the board and has direct experience in the funeral industry. So we're going to be she'll be able to share a lot with us and be able to pick her brain. Other board members on the screen, we've got Dawn Kirkwood, who is our outreach person, and Jim and Judy Taylor, who've been on the board for, I don't know, forever, guys. Judy is the secretary and Jim is the treasurer. So the board members will jump in along the way, to fill in information or share information that they care to share, which will be welcome. And we're always pretty loosey-goosey, pretty casual with these things. Jill and I will have a lot to share, but we'd like you to feel free to ask questions. I won't be able to see because we're on a couple of screens. I won't be able to necessarily see hand movements. So if you can use the reaction button, is it under reactions where you can raise your hand? No, where is it? Yes, under reactions, you can raise your hand and that'll shoot you to the top of the screen so that we're sure to see that you have something that you want to ask or share. Also, feel free to use the chat and we'll all kind of monitor the chat and make sure that all of your questions get answered. Okay. We're going an hour and a half till 5:30. And as I said, it'll be recorded. So do know that if you do ask a question, then you'll be on screen because the recording picks up whoever's talking. It'll show your picture. So if you prefer not to be recorded visually, then use the chat box instead. Okay. I think that's all the rules. Otherwise, feel free to just sit back and listen and enjoy and ask lots of questions. I often find that doing these kinds of presentations, you almost don't have to have anything prepared because people just have so many questions that we could just be, chatting the whole time. So I think we'll just dive in. I was going to start out asking if anyone knows the significance of the number 139. I know Jill knows the answer. 130, there are 139 deaths per day in Colorado. It doesn't happen that often around us in our personal lives. But it happens to, as we know, every single one of us, it will happen to, and it will happen in our lives repeatedly. And so it is something that is part of our daily, it really is part of our lives that needs to be paid attention to and hopefully prepared for. There's almost 300 funeral providers in the state of Colorado, which I was shocked at. And if you look at our price survey on our website, you'll see it's like 286 or something funeral providers. So that's funeral homes and crematories. And I think there's a couple of transport companies on that list. But so this is a huge industry. The U.S. funeral market is a 20 billion with a B dollar a year industry. There's 2.4 million funerals that are provided annually. So it's a huge industry with a lot of complications. There are a lot of really good people in this industry with good hearts who are in the industry because they want to serve. And there are plenty, as in any profession, there's plenty of greed out there and preying on people who are in a vulnerable position. and wanting to, increase income. So I'm going to start off with just an overview of what your rights are so that you know as a consumer, because we're going to be talking a lot about planning ahead and also planning at the time of need. You need to, it's not something that any of us do very often. And so having some knowledge of the way the industry works and knowing what your options are in this arena will be helpful to you as far as not overspending. I think that's one of the main purposes of educating yourself, is not overspending and being able to get what it is that will actually fill your needs. Oftentimes funeral homes are so set in what they offer that people who go in don't realize that they have there's other options or ways that they could have their needs met, especially their emotional needs at a time of grief, that may not be addressed. So we'll start with the dry stuff, which is the fact that in 1984, because of the awareness of the types of advantage that were taken of the uniquely what is referred to as the uniquely vulnerable, people who are newly grieving, they've just lost someone in their life that they love. The practical thing that has to happen is something has to be happening with the body. And they end up in a funeral home, in an arrangement room, having to make, excuse me, plans. And a person in that state of mind is often in shock. They're often in deep grief. They've often not slept for a very long time if they've been with someone who's been in the process of dying. They're not in the state of mind for making big decisions. And a funeral, because of the expense and because of the emotional impact, is a huge, huge decision to be made. So, the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, decided to enact a law in 1984 that was then amended and improved upon in 1990, 10 years later, to try to protect consumer rights. They've done an okay job, but I can tell you that from what I've seen, when they send out undercover shoppers to check out different funeral homes, they're finding at least 1 out of 4 are not following these rules. And that's at the risk of very large fines, but there's not a lot of oversight in this industry, sadly. So here's the things that you have a right to. You have a right to get a price list. If you walk into a funeral home, into a mortuary, you can walk in off the street without an appointment, and you have a right to talk to someone and receive a price list. That price list is referred to as a GPL, or general price list. And all GPLs are required to include a list of 16 common items and services. Unfortunately, a lot of the funeral homes don't use the same linguity on their price list. And so sometimes it's a little harder to discern, comparing apples to apples, but the intention is that a consumer should be able to compare the pricing of, Andrea, you're screen sharing with us here. Are you able to undo that? I'm sorry, here we go.
Andrea needs to go to the top of her screen and has a stop sharing button.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Andrea, do you see that stop sharing button? So it shows that I can share. Andrea, are you there so that you can cancel out your screen sharing so that you can stop sharing? Here we go. I found the button. Okay. Phew. So getting this GPL, if you walk into a funeral home, is one of the things that you are entitled to. The other way you're required to be able to receive pricing is over the phone. If you call any funeral home, they are legally supposed to give you pricing over the phone without you having to share your contact info, without them trying to market to you by getting your name and phone number and email and all that. They're supposed to give you pricing over the phone. And what we have in process right now, the FTC is, it looks like it's moving forward because this law is quite, what is it, 30 years old or so, 30 years old. There was no internet then. And so the FTC is planning to update this rule so that funeral homes will be required to have their pricing on their websites. That's going to be huge for consumers.
What is it?
To not have to make the calls or to, deal with business hours or physically walk into a place. Though I encourage going in to just get a feel for how a funeral home feels, treatment and such. But you should be able to think about from the comfort of your own home, over the internet. Currently, I think it's something like 40% of funeral homes will actually post their price list of BPL on their website. And as a consumer society, we give them lots of extra points for doing that because they're not required to at this point. But it does indicate a desire for transparency. Other funeral homes who do not share their pricing, you wonder what is it that they're trying to hide. Why not be upfront? You have a right to receive a casket price list. They don't have to give this to you to take home, but you have a right to look at a list on the prices of caskets. You have a right to see an outer burial container price list. And for those of you who don't know what an outer burial container is, it is when you've gone to a graveside burial, you'll see that oftentimes there's a box with off to the side. That's the box to put the books in. That the cemetery will tell you is to protect the casket. I can guarantee that the casket doesn't need to be protected, and neither does the body.
Hey, Sue, this is Jill. Sorry to interrupt. Somebody isn't muted. There's some feedback. We've had a couple of participants. Sorry, say something in the chat about hearing feedback. So if everybody can make sure they're muted. Sorry, Sue.
Oh, thanks, Jill. Thanks for noticing that.
Yeah.
Perfect. So we can all get along here. So this outer burial box or grave liner is generally, it's not legally required anywhere, but it's generally required by a cemetery because they want to put the casket and the body inside this container that won't sink into the ground. And it makes their job easier as far as lawn mowing. So it costs you a minimum of about $1,000. But the sole purpose truly is just to make maintenance easier in the cemetery. But the selling point is that it's protecting the body and the casket. You have a right to decline embalming services. How many people are under the impression that embalming is required with a burial? It is absolutely not. There are a couple of states that they require embalming under odd circumstances, like certain causes of death, and for crossing state lines. California, Idaho, Kansas, and Minnesota require embalming for shipping. They're the only states. Other than that, embalming is absolutely not necessary. Refrigeration is completely the alternative. Works absolutely fine. And it's non-invasive because embalming is a very, very invasive process to the body. If you would see the process, you would not want it done to yourself or anyone that you care about. But even though it's not legally required anywhere, the funeral homes will almost always have a policy that embalming is required by them to have a viewing, to have a public viewing. So they will say that it's to protect the public interest, to keep the public from being exposed to germs, bacteria, viruses, and such. None of that really is true. Viruses and germs mainly are communicated, are shared by expiration of breath, which is not happening so much with a corpse. So it's their desire to not only charge the fee for the embalming, but also for cosmetology and for, you know, all the other things that they do to the body to lay it out for a viewing. So it is possible to ask for a private viewing if you're not looking to have a large wake. It is possible to have a private viewing without embalming and with minimal cosmetology so that the body is presentable to the family. Yeah, Jane, did you have a question?
Yeah, the funeral home, and this was in a state other than Colorado, it was in New York, charged us, the family, every time they pulled my mother's body out of the refrigerator to view her. Is that legal?
Yeah, it's legal.
Is it sort of regular practice?
No,
It was like
no.
$100 a time.
Oh, goodness. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Yeah, it's one of the things that they do to run up a bill.
But it is legal.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
thanks.
they're definitely not breaking the law. They're just taking advantage.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for that question. And I'm sorry that, you know, you were treated that way. You have a right to buy only what you want. So most funeral homes will have packages set up that that's their go-to, is to sell you a package. So, and they have, you know, fancy names for the packages, and the packages include the casket and the service and that the box to put the box in the cemetery, and it'll include flowers and stationery and maybe grief support. And so they've put in all these things that really have very little value, throw it into a package. And SCI Corporation, which is the largest funeral corporation in the country, has told executives, their executives have told investors that consumers will spend an extra $1,900 on average when they're buying a package over buying a la carte. So you have a right to just pick the items that you want on that general price list and not pay for the fluff and the pretty candle in a box that they want to give you for an extra $150 or whatever. You have a right to get a billing statement. As soon as you make arrangements, they should be sending you with an itemized bill so that you know what it is you've agreed to. And you have a right to use a different kind of container for cremation. They'll often try to sell you a casket for cremation. Think about the paying for a really nice oak or mahogany box to put your person into, that's then going to go into the furnace and not only just go up in flames, but pollute the environment in the process. So the standard cremation container is a fiberboard box that should be included in the price of your cremation. And that's all that's necessary. Sometimes if a family wants to do a viewing with the body, or have a funeral with the body present before the cremation, you can rent a casket, which is much more reasonable and will present well if that's what you're looking for. And then they can move the body into this fiberboard or cardboard box for the actual cremation. And then the last thing is that you have a right to bring your own casket and your own urn. So they make the casket's the #1 highest expense in a burial funeral. And the urns that they sell at the funeral homes are generally quite costly. So know that you can, sometimes Costco has sales on caskets. Walmart has sales on caskets if you want to buy ahead and store it. Also, they have pretty quick delivery. Etsy has all kinds of gorgeous urns done by artists. You can find, it can even just go into a local art store and find a beautiful container that has a lid on it and use that as an urn. So you have a right to bring that, either of those types of containers, to the funeral home. And they do not have a right to tell you, oh, well, you have to be here to receive the casket and inspect it and take away the packaging, because that kind of thing. Last thing that you need to be aware of is one of the concessions that the FTC made to the funeral directors, because they are a huge lobby. They are a very powerful lobby. They weren't happy about all these rules and having to be so transparent about things. And so what they were gifted with by the FTC is the right to charge a basic services fee. They'd always had a basic services fee, but they made it, official that they could charge this basic services fee. No other industry has a basic services fee, which is supposedly there to cover overhead expenses, employee costs, paying the mortgage, keeping the lights on, that sort of thing. So every funeral home on that GPL will list a basic services fee. And this was the concession to the FTC that they get to do this. And what they did is take advantage of it. And those fees have increased more than 40% since the FTC gave them that gift. And they run anywhere from $695 to over $3,000 just to walk in the door and sit down at the table with them and talk to them. And that's on top of your actual purchases of a casket and a funeral service and such. So that's the funeral consumer, the funeral rule in a nutshell. Does that give you some kind of an idea of what your rights are as far as being able to gather pricing and do some shopping for a funeral?
Sue,
Uh-huh.
is that basic package necessary to be presented to the consumer before they actually get a bill?
It is a line item on the bill.
Right, but do they have to make sure that when you're talking to the consumer, do they have to mention it?
I don't believe they're required to mention it. It's just supposed to be on the general price list. So a person needs to know to look for it.
Sue,
Yes, yes.
on the fiberboard container for cremation, is that typically left open during the cremation, or
No,
and
Nancy,
particularly for military cemeteries?
I'm not sure, but I'm in Cleveland and I visited a crematory here as just not for one. Oh, I need to fix my microphone maybe.
Yeah. Nancy, I can tell you that the box has a lid to it. It is a cardboard coffin.
Yeah. So he puts it on a cardboard and puts it into the furnace.
Right.
One of our Cleveland funeral directors that does a direct cremation. So I think it depends. Probably put it in a small cardboard box, but you'd have to ask the funeral director when you. Here's the other thing that I think is so difficult. We're talking about we're gonna make these arrangements at the funeral director. We're dead. We can't do that. So it's back to what we keep saying is you need to talk to your, Sue, if I say your family. What you want, you're going to need, because you're not going to be there.
Right. Well,
And
that's a very good point, Carrie. And we will be talking about pre-planning and family discussions and such as we go along. Okay. So if are there any other questions on the funeral rule itself? Sarah is asking if funeral homes will sell the cardboard containers. Excuse me. Sometimes they will. Not all of them, but those cardboard containers are often used by families who want to do a home funeral. And so they'll want to purchase them outright so that they can decorate them and use them as far as laying out and as part of their home funeral process. So, side note, I did visit a funeral home probably 10 years ago and found out that those cardboard containers cost them in bulk about $8 a piece, and they will charge you $100 to $150. So that tells you a little bit about what's going on behind the scenes. Okay, if there's not any other questions about the funeral, I'm going to turn it over to Jill. She's got actual industry experience, and we're going to hear some of her stories.
Thank you, Sue. I appreciate it. I'm so glad that Sue did like the numbers, because I'm not great with numbers. Sarah, to answer your question, I'm almost sure that Stork would, a friend of mine with Stork actually is owned, it's privately owned by Feldman's Mortuary, the oldest Jewish mortuary in Denver, bought Stork. And a friend of mine is a funeral director there. I am sure that they would sell you the cardboard container. A small family-owned funeral home is going to be much more likely to sell you one. In regards to those cardboard containers as well, I always, when I was in the funeral industry, I often told families to involve children if you want to get the lid in advance so kids can draw on it, or have, you know, special messages, a picture, just to involve the whole family. You can get those in advance so that the whole family can be involved with their own little special art and memorial on those cardboard containers. So keep that in mind as well. So my name is Jill, Vice President of Funeral Consumer Society of Colorado. I'm also in leadership in the senior living industry, so I work full-time. And my daughter is a hospice nurse, and I grew up with a family, parents who were part of the Hemlock Society in Southern California. So I've been indoctrinated early on to have these conversations, and I'm grateful to have them. For about 3 years, I was in the funeral industry for a small, at the time, privately owned company in the metro area. I was not a funeral director. I was business development, but you don't call that in the funeral industry because that's really poor taste, but that's indeed what I did. It was business development. So I developed incredible relationships with hospices and senior living communities and skilled nursing facilities in regard to educating them on the funeral industry. There was a chaplain with the hospice. He'd been a chaplain for 30 years. He had absolutely no idea that funeral directors were commissioned. 30 years, he was a hospice chaplain. And I think it's incredibly important. I'm in a commission industry. I get paid on move-ins. Commission is not a bad word, but I think we have to be aware of that, which is the reason that we do these events, is to bring awareness to this industry and what you should ask and the questions that you should be armed with in advance. I was at Big Lots the other day and I saw somebody spend 45 minutes testing a couch. We don't do that when we're talking about the funeral industry. It's reactionary instead of proactive, and we want to change that. It certainly is a personal passion of mine to have those conversations so that one can be really well informed. When I was with the funeral industry, a few things. Please, ask the question, ask if they have their own retorts, which are the cremation machines. Ask to see them if you're curious as to what the process is. I had half a dozen people in my years with the funeral industry that would want to meet me down on Santa Fe in the industrial area where this was located and see the process. 100% absolutely perfectly appropriate question. Ask to see it. Ask what the process is. Where is your loved one going to be? Is the removal team contracted? Most likely the answer is yes. It's rare that a funeral home has their employees do the removal of the deceased. So ask what that process is. As far as, you know, what, if that's of interest, it's incredible interest of mine and my hospice nurse daughter. So we want to know the nitty gritty. But again, perfectly appropriate question. Some stories that I've experienced. A large, very old mortuary with a cemetery attached, knew of a $50,000 life policy. This family came to us afterward and said, is that legal? Because the funeral was like $45,000. It was a $50,000 life insurance policy. The arranger of the funeral was the beneficiary, and she needed that money for food and rent. But the deceased had a send-off that was $45,000. Criminal. Nothing that could be done, but it's because we don't educate ourselves in advance, and incredibly, incredibly painful. You know, with the 300 providers in the state of Colorado, there are a lot of options, and just having these conversations in advance. One thing that a lot of people don't know that I always educated on, if you've got a family plot, you have a family plot somewhere and that cemetery is attached to a mortuary where they do the removal, there's the cooler, there's the embalming, there's the body prep. You do not have to use that mortuary that's attached to that cemetery. But that funeral director is not going to tell you that. You can use the place across the street to do the removal, to do all of the body prep, to do the work, and then they will coordinate with the cemetery to get that person in the ground. So that is a way of saving some significant money. It could be thousands of dollars, but the funeral director is not going to tell you that. So I want to tell you that so you can go out and spread it far and wide. That if burial is your thing, have at it, but you do not have to use the mortuary attached to the cemetery. Let's see, what else? Flying by the seat of my pants here. I've been witness to some incredible things in regards to, you can do a witness cremation, you can do a witness of your loved one's body, and it doesn't have to be embalmed. It doesn't. They will tell you it has to be embalmed. It's a short period of time, 10, 15 minutes to say goodbye. There's very, very minimal prep work on your loved one that will be done. They'll be on a gurney, they'll be draped, but you should be able to say goodbye without, certainly without embalming. So question all these things. If you are meeting with somebody in advance and doing this advanced work, question it. Question what they say if it doesn't feel right. If it doesn't feel right in your gut, chances are it's not. Or come back and call Sue. Please don't call me, but call Sue. If Sue can call me, I want to help as much as I can, but I defer to Sue on these, and then she'll loop me in as appropriate.
Jill, can I jump in and share about my
Please.
dad's witness cremation? Because it was a really powerful, powerful experience. And a lot of people don't know that you can, I'm glad you brought it up, A lot of people don't know that you can witness a cremation. Sometimes people will do it just because they want to know that it's their person. They want to physically see that it's their person going into the retort, into the machine. But when my dad died, I had a need to just be there with him as much as possible. And so I told my 4 siblings that I was planning to arrange with the crematory to be there on the day that he was cremated and be able to see him one last time and to be able to participate in moving him into the retort. The 4 of them all cringed and kind of freaked out. And I told them, absolutely optional. This is what I need to do for myself. And if you want to be there, then I would love for you to be there, of course. They all showed up. And so we had some time with my dad's body one more time in a little alcove. Again, like as Jill said, with minimal prep. And I will tell you, he looked dead. And you know what? It was appropriate because he was. And it was part of seeing him in that way was part of having the reality, the new reality set in that my father was no longer with us. He wasn't in that body that was changing. He's had moved on. So we were able to escort him down the hallway to get to the very industrial room, as Jill was describing. All of the crematories or almost all of them, are in very industrial settings or semi-industrial settings. So they escorted us back to the room where there were 3 retorts, and they put my dad's casket on the rollers to go into the machine. The 5 of us stood around the casket, and we shared a little reading about the fire being transformative, and the fire is the warmth of love. And it was just a really sweet, meaningful little prayer that a friend of mine had written for me. And then all 5 of us pushed the casket into the machine. And then all 5 of us piled our hands on top of the button to close the door. And all 5 of us piled our hands on top of the button that started the flame. And that was it. We walked out of there so filled that we were able to walk the way with our father as far as we could, and then release him into the flames, and he was on his own for the rest of the process. So when my mom died a couple of years later, there was no question, doing the exact same thing. We went through the exact same process. So I just want people to know that that is an option. And also with my mom, she had a lot of little quirks, like she was obsessed with reading glasses, and had a couple dozen pairs in her little apartment. Anyway, when we convened in the little alcove to say our goodbyes to her before we went to escort her into the retort, we piled several pair of reading glasses into her casket. My brother stuffed a Kleenex up her sleeve, because she always had a Kleenex up her sleeve. And we had her prepared for everything. He even brought a container of Cool Whip, because she wanted Cool Whip on breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And so all that went into the container with her. And, as long as you're not putting explosives in there that are going to ruin the retort, it's perfectly acceptable. So it was just a little ritual that we went through that was satisfying, and actually it made us all smile. So speaking of cremation, direct cremation, most of you are probably aware that cremation is rising exponentially across the country. I think we're at about 57%. So we're over 50% in the country are people are doing cremation rather than burial. And then of course we do have water cremation and composting, but that's not the subject of today. Excuse me. Colorado, our statistics are 69%. And Boulder County is well in the 80%, 80-some percent of the folks in Boulder County are using cremation. I think somebody had asked about the environmental impact. Well, I can let Jill speak to that in a minute. But it's less
Significant.
environmentally impactful than burial, but it's not great. But to know that the pricing on direct cremation varies astronomically, which is why we want you to pre-shop, plan ahead, don't get caught by surprise. For yourself or other ones, just other loved ones, just know what's available in your area, because cremation can run from $795. Direct cremation means the body's picked up, so it's transported from the place of death to a facility to be put into a refrigerator, and then it is taken to the crematory, cremated, and then the ashes are returned to the family. That's direct cremation. So $795 to anywhere close to $4,000 for the exact same process as the $795 process. This $4,000 places have fancier mortuaries usually with higher overhead. But know that that's the variation. The $795 places often do not have their own crematory. A couple do, but most of them contract out with a crematory that's off premises. But a lot of mortuaries contract with crematories that are off premises. So if it's important to you to like know where your person is at all times, one of the questions to be asking is where does the cremation take place? Where will my person be in the meantime? And then if you have a desire for the witness cremation, is it possible not all of them will accommodate witness? So inquire about that. Yeah, so Jill, do you want to answer the question about the environmental impact?
I'm not a numbers person, so I don't know numbers or anything, but it's significant. I mean, an average cremation takes about 3 hours. It's typically natural gas. I mean, it is significant. That's why there's, water cremation is much less of a significant environmental impact. But yeah, I just know it's significant. That is about all I can say. I cannot speak to any kind of numbers.
Okay. Well,
because I'd be wrong.
I don't remember numbers either, Jill, but I can tell you that what we think of cremation is, you're not taking up space. You're not in a cemetery where they're using fertilizer and pesticides and running giant lawnmowers and all of that, and burying precious resources in the ground, like mahogany woods and oak and steel and all that's just buried into the ground, as if cemeteries basically are giant dumps, to be perfectly blunt. But with cremation, you're burning a body and a container, all of that smoke goes up the chimney and it is toxic. And there are not good regulations. Colorado has 0 regulations around the scrubbers that are, there's no requirement for scrubbers. I mean, there are scrubbers that can be had that will filter all this yuck out of from going into the air. But I was told that the scrubbers are more expensive than the actual retort. So we're talking like $1 million per machine to have these scrubbers, and no one's holding the crematory operators to this, so they're not doing it. And one of the things that goes up the chimney is mercury. Anybody who's still got mercury fillings in their teeth, they're relatively stable while it's solid material in your mouth. Though there are some people who would argue with that, but for sure, when mercury is heated to a high, the heat goes up to 17 to 1800 degrees in a retort. It is direct flame. That mercury is melted and vaporized, and it goes up into the air, and it goes up into the clouds, and then the clouds go over the ocean and the lakes and rain down mercury into our fish that we eat. So it is a consideration now that we've, at least in Colorado, we have water cremation available. It's something that's put me over it's made my decision for me to go to water cremation rather than flame cremation. Other questions? I saw a little wiggle.
Sorry,
Diane.
environmental impact too. I'm sorry, I just jumped.
Sure.
Medical implants. Pacemaker only. As far as our medical implants removed before cremation, flame cremation is what I can speak to, and the pacemaker is removed because it will explode. And when the crematory operator opens that door to literally take a broom and stir, it can explode. So removing the pacemaker is for the benefit of the cremation operator, so there's no injury. A couple of things too, as far as environmental impact. The first time I saw an embalming, the blood goes down the drain. There's no special processing of the blood. The blood literally goes down the drain. And I asked about the bloodborne diseases. The blood goes down the drain.
Mm-hmm. And all the contents of the intestines, all the your innards in your abdomen are all sucked out of you using a troche. Anyway, it's like it's a giant vacuum with a very sharp end on it that goes into the abdomen, and it pulls out all of the guts, all of the organs on the inside of your belly, and all that goes down the drain too. So it's an unpleasant thought, as opposed to water cremation, where they are finding that the excess water from water cremation, if that goes down the drain, it actually helps balance the bacteria in our water system. It's so well balanced pH wise and such that it helps balance. And with water cremation, any kind of joints, replacement joints, got hips and knees and all that, those come through whole and reusable. They won't reuse them here in the States, but they can send them to third world countries, and they will be put into someone else to be utilized that wouldn't have had one. So I think that's kind of cool. Okay, I would like to talk about ways to save on a funeral, ways to save money on a funeral. And Jill and I were bouncing some of these things back and forth. I wanted to first show you if I can work my screen share. No, not that.
And there are a few other questions. We will get to those questions. Thank you for putting those questions in the chat.
Can everyone see this little cartoon? This is actually about pre-planning. Yeah, so this is not a plan, okay? Just so we're clear, being surprised. We definitely want to plan ahead. All right, now I'm the one who can't turn off my screen share. Oh, goodness.
So while Sue is figuring out how to turn that off, which I wouldn't know how either.
Good Lord.
I want to address this. So again, I've worked in senior living about a decade, in assisted living, memory care, skilled nursing, independent living, incredibly emotional, difficult conversations, and to move from their family home or to have a health crisis that requires this move. Please do not leave it up to your children. Do not leave this up to your children. The amount of times, and for context, I'll be 60 this year. I am an adult child. I would not let my parents leave this up to our kids, because I have a very, very religious sister. Very traditional, very religious. Her thoughts are entirely different than my brother and I. And I know of families that I'm just going to leave it up to my kids. It's up to them. Well, do you want your kids to ever talk again? Do you want your kids to have a relationship? Do not leave it up to your children, please, because you want them to know what your wishes are in advance, to be able to grieve together, to be able to honor you, and then to continue on the sibling relationship. Because again, being in senior living, it's all incredibly difficult. And I've heard that. I've heard it over and over again. I'm leaving it up to my kids. And depending on where I am in the process, I am big and loud and I will voice my opinion if it's appropriate. To please don't leave it up to your kids. You know, here's the document, the Colorado disposition of last remains, something that is in writing that makes your wishes known so that your children can carry it out.
Yeah, and Jill, I'm sure you've sat with families where anytime you've got, first of all, the siblings don't always get along, but then if you throw in, say, a second marriage and step sibs and a step parent and all that, you've got potential for things to go south really fast. So to make your plans ahead of time, by shopping around, getting an idea what pricing is and who you like as far as who's going to handle you and your family at the end, and then put all that in writing and include that. Please, please, please do not put this in your safety deposit box. Don't put it in your will. The will is often not even found or looked at until well after the body's been disposed of. And attorneys will put your funeral plans in your will. It's not the place for it. It needs to be kept separate. And I tell people to attach it to their medical power of attorney and any other advanced care planning that they've done, because all that will be seen along the way. And so people will be aware by having that attached to those documents instead. As far as saving money, avoiding embalming, definitely, if I mean, unless you really want the full-on viewing for a full burial, that is your choice. But you can also plead a pretty good case for refrigeration and ice packs and cosmetology, but just refrigeration instead of the embalming. And just, getting your own casket, we talked about that. Not leaving it up to your kids. And the last thing is, you can consider a donation of your body to medical science. And if you do that, if you donate to a medical school for your body to be used for medical students to work on an anatomy lab for a couple of years, or you donate to a medical research company that will provide hearts to heart surgeons and faces to plastic surgeons and whole bodies to the military for explosive research. You don't get to pick generally, but if you're willing to do that, any of those scenarios, you get a free cremation. There is no charge for a cremation. So people may choose those options for one or both reasons, either being altruistic and wanting to have some good come from their body after they don't need it anymore, or just because it's free, because if they don't have the funds or they don't want to spend the funds, that's an option.
But
Another,
sorry, Sue, typically body donation is at the time, or eligibility is at the time of death. So if like they don't have a cosmetics company that needs your nails, you should have a backup plan, because yes, it is a free cremation if there is a service that needs what you have to offer at the time. But I always encourage people to have a backup plan, because eligibility is at the time of death, whether they need you or not.
right. And making the plans for donation, for donating your body. And please differentiate, know that this is completely different than donating organs, live organs to a live person. But donating for science, those arrangements ideally are made ahead of time before you die, so that the family knows what's to be, and the company already has interviewed you and gotten your medical history and stuff, and it makes things way easier on the family. It's too much for a family to try to have to navigate that at the time of death. And as Jill said, always have a company also listed as backup to do a cremation for you if either they don't need you or you die under circumstances that aren't appropriate for them to take you.
Right.
certain disease processes and stuff, they can't utilize the body. So,
Sue, yeah, there's some questions. Just a sec, Rhonda. So we've got Ron Garrett. Sue, you may, oh, yeah. Hold on. Yes, we have recorded webinars on our website, and there was one on different body disposition methods. There was the funeral pyre. We talked about water cremation. So Ron had recommended that we put the link to the water cremation session because somebody asked about water cremation. So yes, we can get that link. I believe they're also on our website of all the webinars. And very, very good information. And then Mary asked, do you have to use a funeral home for water cremation or regular cremation? Yeah, because it's a pretty special process. Flame cremation, there is in Colorado somewhere, Sue, I can't remember where. There is a county in Colorado that has a license for an outdoor big bonfire called a funeral pyre, PYRE. So no, you don't have to use a funeral home with this one county in Colorado for the funeral pyre, but you would have to use a funeral home for water cremation or regular cremation because of the scientific process and the process that goes into it.
and the funeral pyre happens in Crestone.
Thank
You
you.
have to be a resident down there, or at least have a summer home or something there. And there's one up at Shambhala. Again, you have to be a Shambhala member, but you can also have a funeral pyre on your own private land if you are rural. And that has been done in Boulder County. It's a county by county thing, but Boulder County, I know for sure of families that have been helped by the natural funeral to set up a funeral pyre. You have to pull a fire permit so that the fire department will be aware of what's going on. So.
Tom, oh, go ahead.
I would talk about leaving some money in some form, possibly in a life insurance policy to cover your expected expenses. And the fact that the money that would be left over from a life insurance after paying for those expenses would go back to the home that you were in if you were leaving expenses there. If you're under a program where you don't have any money left, you should be able to have a life insurance policy that would pay for the funeral expenses, and then anything left over from that would go back to the home to pay the state back for all the money it was spending.
Well, thank you for bringing that up, Jim. Yeah, we did want to talk about pre-planning a funeral, but not prepaying. I do want to go into that, but Rhonda's been very patient with her hand up, so we're going to scoot over to Rhonda. And
Hi, thank you. I'm not good at numbers either, but going back to the cremation, I believe also as far as the of what goes in the air, the energy to run the crematory machine is like 500 miles of if you want 500 miles, that's how much energy it takes just to run the retort. And then I had another comment, two comments. One comment, you can also, I think, in a lot of states, be buried on your own property, which would save some money.
Sure.
And also, what are your thoughts, and are you familiar with funeralocity.com?
Yes, Funeralocity is I think you have to pay for it. They represent different funeral homes. So you can do a search and say, find me a funeral home in my area. And it will generate a list of those funeral homes and their pricing, at least for basics like direct cremation and direct burial. I don't know that they represent all the funeral homes, because I believe they make their money by subscriptions, or, you know, the funeral homes are paying them to market. But yeah, it's something you can check out. I would recommend just starting with our price survey on the Funeral Consumer website, funeralconsumercolorado.org. And there's a tab that says price survey, and we have the basics, as in direct cremation. We have the basic services fee listed. Though I can tell you, in making some of these phone calls, some of the funeral homes who I called didn't know what a basic services fee was. That was frustrating. Anyway, and then we have a few notes on there about different funeral homes, that they may be focused on environmentally friendly, or that they serve mainly the Catholic faith or the Jewish faith, that they allow witness cremation, little notes like that. So it's a place to start. Phone numbers and websites are listed so that you can narrow it down on, you know, maybe just by using the pricing, and then make some phone calls and inquire further. So,
Thank you.
and somebody,
I had a
in the
question
private
about
chat-
death occurring away from home.
Yes. Death occurring away from home is definitely something that happens. I can tell you that shipping a whole body from one state to another will cost you thousands. I think this person did say that they were planning on cremation. That simplifies things, because your cremation can occur in the place of death in that state, and then the cremation ashes are very inexpensive to ship. I think they charge $150 or something to send them USPS. Does that, and if I didn't answer that question fully, jump in.
Yeah, it says they pre-planned. So if you've already paid for a service in Colorado, Tom, and please clarify, because we want to make sure we get your question answered, or at least direct you. So if it's a pre-planned funeral with a company in Colorado and you die in Florida or Nicaragua, what does that look like? Yeah, it's gonna cost money. There are companies that do it, and then if it's out of the country, that becomes much more challenging, because the country of death is going to have requirements.
Right.
Yeah.
Whatever funeral home you've planned at, they have, this is what they do. So they will, if they're contacted, they're the ones to contact, since you've planned with them, and they will make arrangements with a funeral home in whatever place it is that you've died. And yes, there will be an extra expense, though a lot of them do sell a deal that's like $400 to use this particular company that I can't think of the name of, but it's a company that deals with a specific thing, getting a body back to their where they lived or where they planned. So Tom, I would call whoever it is that you've planned with and just ask them what their specific process is. I've learned that a lot of times I don't need to know how it's going to happen. I just need to know that these people, like these people are professionals, and people die under all kinds of circumstances, and this is it's totally doable. But know that it would be ideal to have the cremation happen in the place of death and then shipped back to here.
And as far as I will always caution against sending cremated remains in the mail. Mail gets lost all the time. That's not a do-over. So if you can carry them on an airplane, carry them on.
Right. Just make sure that the cremains are in a container that's X-rayable.
And the original cremation container with the sticker on it that says what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can tell you a cute story. I was bringing my portion of my mother's ashes back from Illinois, and I had them in a little makeup bag. And I went through TSA and I knew I was going to get stopped. You know, I had a bag full of powder. And so I get to the other side and the guy's like, you know, what is this? I said, it's my mother. And he said, well, I'm really sorry. I've got to run her back through the machine and I've got to test for drugs. So you know, go ahead. I get it. Do what you have to do. He brings her back to me. He's very sweet and kind. And he said, yeah, you know, she tested fine. And I said, well, that's very funny because when she was alive, she was living on painkillers for the last like 4 years nonstop. She would never have passed the drug test. So I'm glad to know she's clean now. and we carried on with our journey. So yeah, I was impressed with how kind and sweet the TSA guy was. So as far as prepaying, when you're pre-planning, prepaying is not required. I know a lot of people have prepaid for funerals and it gives them great peace of mind. They've made all their selections. They know that it's paid for, though I will tell you oftentimes the kids or whoever end up at the funeral home thinking that it was all paid for and then finding out, oh, but then there's the flowers, oh, but then there's the luncheon, oh, but then there's, you know, and there's a lot of other items that were not included in that original payment, you know, prepaid package. Another thing that can happen with prepaying is if you prepay and you have to make sure that the people who you're leaving behind know that you did that and where to find the paperwork. Because it is not uncommon for it to happen that a family has no idea that dad and mom completely took care of everything and then they go off and plan a whole nother funeral and pay for it. And they, you know, they may be able to get their money back from the policy that their parents had taken out, but you know, it's unnecessary paperwork, it's unnecessary headache. And one of the main selling points for prepaying is locking in pricing, like locking in today's pricing and then, you know, hopefully dying 20 years later and having a super deal. But if that paperwork isn't found, that's out the window. You know, you may get your actual money back, but that's out the window. Yeah, Andrea, did you have a question?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Mhm.
So I back at the beginning of COVID, I had already, my mom had passed away a year before, so, and she had a prepaid cremation and burial plan, which really was of a huge help to me. So I figured, okay, you know, who knows what's happening with COVID, so I did one of those prepaid. It's just to get cremated, and then there's like a cardboard kind of an urn, because I don't want a funeral, I just want to, you know, cremate me, put the ashes in a little container, and we've got some family land that everybody's ashes have been sprinkled on for the last couple decades. And so that's where I'm going. But I really did struggle a bit with this company. It's a national company. One of the guys I had to deal with was just not really forthcoming with information. So is there any way to do, I mean, this was a few years ago, is there any way to kind of do an audit of your plan, your prepaid plan, to make sure that, you know, what I thought I was getting then is the same now? You're off, Sue, you're muted. You're saying anything.
Yeah. All I can tell you is to call the company and
Okay.
get clarification. And,
Okay, I'll do that. And they shouldn't charge me for that, right?
No.
Okay.
They don't charge for consultations or anything, but, and if you can get it in writing, all the better, just to make sure that you are very clear on. what
Okay,
you-
good. I just want to make sure that, you know, when I go, that that my daughter doesn't all of a sudden have them give her some song and dance, like, well, you got to pay 500 for this and 200 for that and blah, 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 you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a nice gift you're giving to her. Jim and Judy, you guys had something you wanted to contribute?
Just wanted to contribute. We knew of a lot of people who prepay their plan and then something happens to the mortuary or the cemetery. They go bankrupt or they change ownership and they lose the contract, they lose their paperwork. It just happens too often. And it's so scary that here they have this false positive of what's going to happen to their remains, and their children have to sort that out and deal with it because it's a big mess.
Yeah, things like that happen where the cemetery or the crematory, the mortuary goes out of business or it gets bought out. You know, you're dealing with a reputable company and then they get bought out by someone who's not as reputable. So, you know, it does work for some people. And so I don't like to make everybody nervous. Everyone who's bought a Neptune Society policy, I don't want to make them all nervous. Just be sure you call and confirm what it is you have. Make sure you understand it. Make sure you have the right phone number to be passed on to the people that you leave behind, and make sure that your people know who to call. And buying cemetery plots and niches ahead of time. I can tell you in my family, I own, well, my family owns 2 niches in Florida. Because my dad moved back to Illinois after paying for those, and I've got 2 plots in Illinois because my mother changed her mind to be cremated and scattered rather than buried. So if you know for sure you're staying in the same place and you're not going to end up moving out of state to live with another child in your later years, and you know you're not going to change your mind about things, prepaying can absolutely work. But our recommendation generally as the Funeral Consumer Society is to, if you are able to have funds available that you maintain control over in your bank account, set that bank account up as either joint with someone that you trust explicitly, or set it up as payable on death, POD, so that all the person has to do is go into the bank with a death certificate and they'll release the funds directly to them and then they can use those funds for the funeral. If you do that, then your money stays in your control. If you have an emergency, you have access to it, to those funds, rather than tying it up with a funeral home. Be aware that the funeral home, when they sell you a pre-plan, they're making money off of that policy. They make several $100s commission, which they're entitled to, but just be aware that there is a commission paid to the planner who sells you that pre-planning policy. And if you cannot afford to pay for your policy in full, so say you want a $5,000 policy for a flame cremation and a few other frills or whatever, and you don't have the $5,000 to just pay for the policy, and you have to pay for it on time, it will cost you probably about roughly 25% extra, if not more. They don't call it interest, they call it insurance, that they'll still honor the policy while you're in the process of paying for it, which is a good thing. But you can end up paying 25 to 50% more. And there goes your savings for locking in the prices, today's prices. So just buyer beware. There's 2 different ways to prepay with a funeral home. One is with an insurance policy. That's is more common, and that is transferable. If you move state to state, that's all transferable. Those funds are transferable to another funeral home or whatever. The other way is using a trust. There's a Colorado trust that money is put into, that the funds are put into to be protected. I think one of the most common calls to the FCA, the Funeral Consumers Alliance, that are like parent umbrella that's national, 40% of their calls are issues with trusts where there's been embezzling, pilfering of funds moved around illegally, funds that were supposed to be put into the trust that weren't. Neptune Society has been called out repeatedly for selling, say, a $2,000 cremation, and they say that the buyer has received good. They don't have to put money in the trust for goods received. So they give the person their urn, and they give them their paper goods like thank you notes and a guest book, and they might give you a nice candle in a box. So they give you those few items that you could go to Kohl's or Walmart or whatever and buy for under $100. They say it's worth 800 and you've already received it. So that 800 is protected from going into the trust. So of a $2,000 policy, and they don't even sell them for 2,000 anymore, 1,200 goes into the trust and is protected, and the rest of it is just gone. And if you lose track of your earn and you don't bring it with you when you move to the nursing home, it's just gone. So just know that's one of the things that can happen by having the money put into trust, supposedly to be safe. Diana, did you have something? No? Andrea? Oh, Andrea, you're on mute. Oh, Andrea, you're still on mute. There you go.
Sorry, because of the scandals in funeral homes in southern Colorado lately, do you see any crackdowns on the funeral industry coming along with it, including improved standards and protections?
Yes, there is legislation in process as we speak. Colorado has been the single only state in the country that has not required licensure of funeral directors.
Wow.
We require licensure of funeral homes, of the funeral homes, the businesses, but the actual funeral directors have not been required to be licensed. And so we have become somewhat of a melting pot for people who want to run a scammy funeral business, but they live in Alabama or Missouri or Texas or someplace, and they can't get away with it. So they move to Colorado and open up here, and there's just not the oversight. So they're planning on requiring licensure, at least certification, if not licensure, for funeral directors. And the plan is to have not just better laws around oversight, but actually funding to pay for that oversight, because you know how that happens with laws where they pass a law, but they don't fund it, and so nobody can do anything. So they're planning on having funding available to hire more than just a quarter-time inspector to cover the entire state, which is what we've had so far.
But with that being said, the funeral director that you mentioned with that horrific case was licensed. He had let it lapse, but he was licensed.
Well, his
So-
funeral home is licensed.
Thank
Um,
you. Thank you for the clarification, Sue.
And it lapsed last November, but no one went to look to see if he was still doing business without his license. There was no, oversight. So
And then there was the other one where some guy got evicted or moved out of his house and they found the cremains of a number of people. And then there was a body of some older woman in a hearse in the backyard of the property. So it's like, how does that even happen,
it's very, very sad, and it's incredibly disrespectful of.
Oh, and the families of those people,
Yes.
it's like, when I got my mom's cremains, it's like, I felt pretty confident that that was her, and I want the same thing for me, because by God, I'm haunting those people if they mess with my ashes.
There you go. Jim and Judy, did you have something else?
The news article I saw about the licensure issue was that almost any action has some sort of other side. And the other side of this one is, of course, that the all of the people who are not licensed right now, many of probably over half of the funeral directors would fail to get licenses the
Right.
way the system is set right now. And so all of a sudden, half or more than half of the funeral homes would go out of business. So they are going to have to allow those people to stay in business without their registration for a number of years.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure how they're gonna work that out, but their intention is to grandfather these people in with guardrails and, you know, having to, I don't know, pass a test or something. And even with licensure, like Jill mentioned this, the guy who and his wife who committed this horrific crime down in the Springs, he had passed his boards and everything in another state. So just going to school and passing a test does not equal having ethics. So we need the oversight. I think that's the biggest thing that we're pushing for is that there needs to be oversight. And knowing that if you file a complaint, that there will be some follow through. Right now, there's several different organizations you can file a complaint to, and they log it, and they look for patterns or whatever. And there might be some follow through if they see a pattern, but they will not go out on an individual call just because someone said, well, these guys, you know, lied to me and overcharged me several $1,000s. So, oh my goodness, we are close to.
Have a couple of questions in the chat real quick. Fern, I know we answered your question between pre-play and pre-plan. If not, reach out to us after. Are green burials less expensive? And then do you have to have a container for water cremation?
Green burials are not necessarily less expensive. They are less expensive, generally speaking, because you're not paying for embalming. You're generally buying a simple casket that's biodegradable, and you may even just use a shroud. So it is very possible to spend less on a green burial. But the other side of that is you can go down to Seven Stones, which is down south. Shoot, what's the area?
Chatfield.
Or in the Chatfield area, and their green burial plots are $10,000. So, you know, again, it's like you've got to shop. What was the other half of that question?
The second question from Mary, do you have to have a container for water cremation?
Oh, no, you do not. There's no container at all. The body goes into the vessel that's utilized. It's a large metal vessel, and it goes in au naturel. So they don't want any excess fabric or anything else in there that has to be dealt with. So, Sean, what did you have a question?
Yes. Is there a listing of the green burial locations on your website?
I don't believe there is, and I'm making a note. We'll be sending out a follow-up email from this webinar, and I will include a list of those green burial locations. There's only a handful.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. And
Bill had his hand up as well.
Well, I just didn't want there to be confusion about a container. My wife had a water cremation when she died in July of this past year. And the container, if you mean where the whole body is placed, is a retort, but it's alkaline hydrolysis, which is a solution that dissolves all the stuff in the body. And I received back, which I call a container, the cremains, which are something like white cornmeal of my wife. And we don't call it ashes, we call it cremains because it's the result of a water cremation. But those were ground in an industrial grade blender grinder, and I received that back. And so they provided that container for the cremains.
thank you, Bill. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, it's whether you get cremains back from a flame cremation or from a water cremation, what you're getting is the bones that have been ground, and then they're placed, if you don't pay for anything extra, they're placed into a plastic bag inside of a cardboard box. Is that what you got, Bill?
Yes. Oh, well, it was a bamboo urn that we received back. Is that what you said?
Oh, no, a cardboard box is like standard issue, so a bamboo urn is a nice upgrade.
I put in the chat, I put the address of the natural funeral in Lafayette, Colorado, that we used for my wife.
Oh, that was you. Thank you. Yep, I'm a fan. We're a fan of them. Definitely an ethical operation. All right, are there any other questions that we missed in the chat? If we missed it, go ahead and raise your hand and ask us in person if you care to. Oh, someone does it. Oh, no, that one got to that one. Oh, someone wanted to know the definition of removal. We were referring to a removal. A removal means removing the body from the place of death, transporting it to the funeral home or what they would call a care center, where the body would be then kept in refrigeration. So that's a removal. And one thing to be aware of that you can ask about at a funeral home is, what does their removal look like? Because there's different ways of handling the body in this very sensitive time that are more sensitive than others. So standard issue is just to move the body from wherever the person died onto a gurney into a big black bag and zip it up over the face. That is traumatic on a family to stand there and see that. It's harsh. So there are many other variations on the theme where the person may be moved to the gurney in the bedclothes, with the blankets and wrapped with those blankets, and maybe just a blanket laid over the face, pulled up over the face, and they'll leave a rose on the pillow where the person had been. And sometimes they'll involve the family as far as walking the body out to the vehicle that they're going to use. Some funeral homes still use hearses, feeling, that's like the respectful way to do it. And some use vans because, they want to be secretive about, we don't want to let everybody in the neighborhood know someone died. So if you have an opinion or feeling about what type of vehicle is used and whether or not you might want to be the one to walk your parent or spouse or whatever out to the vehicle in a respectful way, those are some things that you can inquire about. Okay, any other? Yeah, Andrea.
I will say that after my mom passed, she was in an assisted like a nursing facility. And I called the organization that she had her policy with, and this was like around 1 or 2 in the morning. And a young guy came out, and he was he must have had some fantastic training on top of being a fantastic person. He was so sensitive to me. He said, because I was sitting next to my mom, he said, I can come back if you need more time, whatever. And I said, no, you need to, because it was so early in the morning. And then he told me exactly what he was going to do, what the process was. He asked if I would like him to sit with me for a little while, he's just like, whatever you need, let me know. Can I bring you anything? And it was a great comfort to me because I was by myself. So I just told him I couldn't watch him bundle her up and take her off. So I went to the nursing station in the facility and then they sent word that she was gone then. But I think that it was fabulous. His training and his demeanor was really comforting to me.
That's so nice to hear. There are a lot of people in this industry who really care.
Yeah.
And who
Yeah,
are
I agree. I had both those experiences, Sue. When my father died in 95 in a nursing home, and in Cleveland, we have a memorial society, so we have arrangements with funeral directors. And he did come. My mother was alive at that time and put my father in that black bag, zipped it up. But in September in 21, when my wife died, fortunately, it was here at home, no COVID, from dementia over a long period of time with nurse practitioners. The funeral home that came was just like the one you're talking about recently. We were able to Well, the nurse practitioner was here for took a couple hours. Well, we needed to talk to the doctor that he would sign a death certificate in Ohio. And then they came in a van, though, two people, nurse practitioner, and I had kind of cleaned. There wasn't a lot to do the body of Lee, and then they wrapped it like in a shroud and put a beautiful quilt and wheeled it down. My son was here at the time, so it looking from what you're sharing, Sue, and is that some funeral directors are, and this hopefully is like it is more today than it was in 1995 with my father. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your experiences, Gary. I know we're over time. I wanted to mention just a couple of things before we go. One is that as the Funeral Consumer Society, we champion our family-run independent funeral homes. They are coming. They are usually members of your community. They've often been there in the community for years, and they shop in your grocery store. They send their kids to the same schools as you. It's not a guarantee on ethics and all that, but it is certainly a more likely a good hand-holding experience where you walk in the door and the person that meets you is the owner or someone who's been there for a long time who will take care of you from the minute you walk in the door through the funeral process. With a corporate run, and you have every right to ask who owns the funeral home. With a corporate run institution, their obligations are to their investors. They are required to have high profits. They have very siloed people. They have a marketing person who will meet with you to sell you the arrangements that you might be making. They are required to hit certain sales numbers, et cetera. It doesn't mean that there's not good people in these corporate run funeral homes with hearts, but they have a different system that they're working within as far as how they handle you. They've got someone who's doing the arrangements with you, and then probably someone different who's the actual funeral director, and it's not the same experience as with an independent run funeral home. And then the last thing I want to leave with you guys is, should you experience a death of a loved one, especially an unexpected death, your person doesn't wake up in the morning, or they've been on hospice and it's been expected, just know that there is no emergency. Nothing has to happen right away. Funeral homes will tell you, oh, we need to get the body, do the removal right away. We need to get transport. The body will start to decompose and we need to get them into our care facility. Not true. Nothing has to happen with the body for 24 hours. In Colorado specifically, we have a law that you don't have to refrigerate or embalm or bury or cremate until 24 hours is up. So you can take your time. You can be with your person. You can let the experience be absorbed by you as a powerful thing that has just happened. This is a powerful transition, a death. It's not scary. And the worst has already happened. So you don't have to hurry and have the body whisked away. Once the body's taken away, you may not see it again. You may not see your person again, especially if it's a direct cremation. So take your time and check in with yourself to when it is that you feel ready to have transport come, and you can hold off the mortuary or the coroner or whoever, usually to accommodate your emotional needs, not their need for efficiency. So
just clarification, the coroner will still come and visit and do their investigation, but it doesn't mean that that your loved one is taken away right away. This is absolutely heartbreaking in senior living or a hospital or a nursing home, because so often, people like, okay, get rid of the body. And then I've had people come and say, I have family flying in, can they see it? Well, the funeral home is now going to charge $250 for you to, or whatever, for you to come and see your loved one. So advocate for yourself, advocate for sitting with and holding space with your loved one so that you don't have to pay the funeral home to remove them from the cooler and set them up so you can see them. If it's in your home, that's even more beautiful. In a senior living community, that was their home. Advocate and say you want family to come, please. And the leadership of that senior living community or hospital should certainly grant that.
Right. Yeah, thanks, Jill. All righty. Well, thank you all for being here and having great questions and being so attentive. And like I said, we'll send a follow-up email with the recording of this. And I will send you that green burial list and a couple other things that we talked about, including this declaration of disposition of last remains form. I'll send that with an explanation of what that's about in case it applies to you.
So I have
I'd
a
like-
really quick question. What was the name of the funeral parlor that was local that you recommend?
Oh, the Natural Funeral? Yeah, there's lots of other good ones too, but we do like the Natural Funeral. They're the ones that are the leaders in water cremation and body composting.
And Diane, who should one call first in case of a death at home? Call 911. You have to call 911. The coroner will come, but you don't have to rush the body to a mortuary. But yeah, you'd have to call 911 for a death at home because they need to do their investigation, clear any family members of any kind of crime. But then you can take the time with your loved one at home after the coroner is cleared.
And when you call 911, if your person is clearly deceased, their body is cool, to ask for non-emergency and be very clear that the person is definitely deceased, because otherwise you're going to get the full-on bells and whistles,
Thank
fire
you.
department and paramedics, and they're going to come running in trying to do CPR or something. And it's just, it's a brutal experience to see that happen to someone that you care about, that you know is gone. So be sure you let them know that it is not an emergency and that they are absolutely deceased. So, okay, well, we're way over. I'm glad you all stayed. It was good questions and all that. Thank you so much. Thank you for supporting the Funeral Consumer Society with, I know some people had trouble making donations. Donations are not required for these webinars, this is our mission, is to be able to deliver information to the people in Colorado. So I apologize if there was trouble making a donation. If you're feeling inclined, you can try again. We'll give you another opportunity with the follow-up email. And thank you for that ahead of time, if that's in your purview. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. And hey, thanks to everybody who commented about very personal experiences with their deceased loved ones. By sharing that information, you help us all. So thank you.
Yeah, very ditto. All right, I'll have a good evening. Enjoy this glorious weather we've been having.
Yeah.
Take care.
Take care.